This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. A cattle market update from Elliott Dennis, University of Nebraska at Lincoln livestock economist, begins today's show as he discusses the market last week, how packers are adjusting, and export relationships. Jenny Ifft, K-State Flinchbaugh Agricultural Policy Chair, keeps the show rolling as she explains the supplemental coverage option and enhanced coverage option and what has changed since last year. Wrapping up the show is K-State Fisheries and Aquatics Extension Specialist Joe Gerken as he chats about the concern of contaminants in fish. That and more is coming up ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our Monday show with the cattle market update from University of Nebraska at Lincoln livestock economist Elliott Dennis. Elliott, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Elliott, kicking off our conversation, what did we see for feeder cattle?
Yeah, the feeder cattle index, which is basically a weighted average of cash sales over 12 states, was pretty much flat this week. Not a lot of movement, even though we had some states that showed kind of seasonal highs. The different contracts in the feeder cattle complex were trading higher, but then on account of a rumor of New World screw worm was detected for feeder cattle, the markets kind of collapsed, actually really dropped about $12 a hundredweight from where we were at on really our Thursday highs. And so that kind of put a dampen as we kind of, left the week. But kind of the good thing is that the feeder cattle is still kind of driving the market. We are short cattle. It's starting at the feeder cattle, and those are definitely positioned to go higher as we reach really a part of the year where we're just continually low on feeder cattle in the spring.
And while we're low on cattle right now, we are starting our next season for some producers?
Yeah. So in the last couple of weeks, I've been giving different presentations around the Midwest states, and as kind of taking straw polls with producers, just where are you at? Calving has started for some individuals as they kind of try to target, essentially the spring months of 2027 for fat cattle. And it was kind of interesting as I was doing, we know the USDA cattle inventory reports coming up at the end of this month. And so I was just curious how many people were retaining animals, and just the straw poll in the states that I was in, only about half producers had indicated that they had more heifers that they were retaining this year than they were last year. And about 2/3 said they had more cows. And so really kind of shows you that there is still kind of mixed signals out there about at least the producers that I've talked to about whether they're in full rebuild mode or not. And I think there's just some, lingering issues about whether, this market's going to stay firm.
What do we see for live cattle?
Yeah, live cattle also got a big bump in the beginning of last week, really on results of kind of USDA adjusting yields and total production for corn. That kind of dropped the corn market out, and ultimately that kind of gave the bump to the live cattle market. But really, as we kind of continued through last week, we had pretty light trade. And some of that light trade in the negotiated cash was kind of doing this shift of where those formula cattle were going to go that were out of the Lexington plant. Particularly here in Nebraska, we had really, really light trade. And I think that, the live cattle market was really searching for a cash signal this week, and they didn't get it. They were also affected, of course, by that New World screw worm rumor that out there. And then kind of the larger thing was just packers, cutting kill this week. Really going into the week, we were already down year over year to where we were a year ago. And then, of course, with the plant, Lexington kind of, reducing its kill, we're going to be, maybe sub 550s for the total weekly kill. So that's going to help some of the boxed beef price a little bit. But it really has strong implications where we think about just, where packers are prioritizing. So if we have, lower need for cattle, or packers seem to be prioritizing kind of formula cattle or cattle that are committed to the plant already. And so right now we're kind of in a situation where that negotiated cash tends to be kind of this residual supplier in the market as we kind of sort through total cattle supply and what's packing capacity out there.
Elliot, as you've talked with the people in the cattle industry in Nebraska, have they figured out what their game plans are for as that Lexington plant is closing down?
Yeah, there tends to be kind of two camps. Some people are being redirected to the Dakota City plant, and some of those producers, were on formula. The Lexington plant was a pretty heavy formula plant, and so some of those are going to go up to the Dakota City plant, and really for people that are kind of west of Lexington, they've some of those have kind of seems like are trying to work out arrangements to go down to the Holcomb, Kansas plant. And so when you're really thinking about just kind of profitability for those producers, I mean, they're paying a whole bunch more in freight. I mean, a plant like this has strong implications for producers and, for the larger industry because it affects the competitiveness of bidding for fat cattle on the open market.
You've mentioned the New World screwworm a couple of times, and you also noted that it's rumored, and so no issues with the New World screwworm being in the
Yeah,
U.S.?
yep. USDA has confirmed that it was a rumor and that there was no confirmation there. But that just kind of shows you how quickly the markets can really react and how these high trading algorithms can really kind of wipe out gains, kind of highlighting the need that in an interconnected world that we have, we need to be aggressively doing price risk management that's proactive and not allowing kind of markets to kind of be wiped out like this and really affect us.
And you've mentioned and talking about Lexington having less harvest, and are you seeing an impact for our consumers?
Yeah, when we think about kind of where the beef prices are at, as I mentioned, the packers are, cutting some of the kill capacity back, and that's boosting a little bit of the box beef price. But when we think about why is box beef even struggling right now, and really has to do with, I think, a little softening of consumer demand on the beef prices. And so I've, reached out to several kind of small retailers, in kind of, suburban areas to kind of get an idea of kind of where they're at. And they've all indicated that they've started needed to cut kind of gross margins on products or that they're selling for beef. And they've really kind of noticed kind of consumers kind of backing off a little bit. And so I think this is kind of a larger signal out there that, that packers, of course, are picking up, but even local, retailers that are trying to move, good product, CAB product, and just consumers are, starting to walk away from that a little bit. So we've always talked about, kind of two things that were really driving the market this past year, which was strong beef demand and kind of a tighter cattle supply due to a variety of reasons. But, how and for how long, consumers can continue to pay higher prices. That doesn't discount that we have good quality out there, but consumers may be beginning to signal. But we'll have to see kind of over this next, 4 to 6 weeks.
Is there a chance we're going to get ourselves in a pickle with having beef and consumers and making everyone per se happy?
I think right now the administration's focus is on kind of this affordability and prices. And so I think what we're going to see, particularly into this year is what are those policies that really try to target the affordability of products, beef being just one of those products which they're going to target. And so that's what I'm kind of looking towards in this year. There can be a variety of policies, lots of ways you can accomplish that. But really when we think about this year as a midterm year and what that might look like. And so I think as an industry, we need to kind of take those things into account. And then, of course, once again, going back to risk management, price risk management, what are we doing to kind of see the value that's out there and protect profits when we can?
And a couple of other things keeping an eye on. You heard about at the 3-state beef conference, and what were some big topics you saw from there?
Yeah, so myself, Dr. Payne, a veterinarian from Missouri, and Dr. Jiang from agriculture engineer from University of Nebraska-Lincoln, we all participated in a 3-state beef conference, which really went around Missouri, Iowa, and Nebraska. So Dr. Payne was really talking about the Asian longhorn tick and its implication for thaleria and really kind of long-term implications for the industry. We've had cases of it in Nebraska, can have pretty significant death losses, and just some really good information that he shared on ways that we can monitor and protect and kind of the difficulty in differentiating that from just like normal respiratory disease because it presents the same. Dr. Xiang really talked about just different technologies that are out there that can improve our management practices. So a lot of things she focused on was virtual fencing and how that can improve essentially our total AUMs we can potentially get off of different types of grazing systems. And what that might mean for just water development on our operations. And then I focused on a little bit about how the global export market really can shape the U.S. cattle supply. And so it was a great conference and great to meet producers kind of around different states.
What were some of your key points that you really highlighted when looking at exports?
Yeah, just kind of highlighting that the U.S. some of the value that we receive for cattle today is derived from the export market. So right now we export about 13% of all our beef and beef variety products overseas, and that equates to about $400 on a fed steer. So if you can imagine that that value is no longer there, or those export markets are no longer there, there's $400 right off the top that aren't available for, in the fed cattle market. And then just kind of highlighting that a lot of these policy changes can have real implications, both for domestic production, but also development from other countries. So of course we had the Chinese come out and say that they were going to basically curb beef imports. And so that's going to have an impact on places like Argentina, that is a huge market for Argentinian beef, Australia, and of course Brazil. And then what does that ultimately do for the production and development of the beef industry in these individual countries? So we know obviously Australia is kind of heating up. And then think about Brazil. They've got corn, they've got distillers. They're importing different cattle genetics. And what does that ultimately mean for their development of their feeding industry? And then really competing with us in Australia for kind of this grain finished product in the global export market.
Elliott, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
That was University of Nebraska at Lincoln livestock economist Elliott Dennis. We're cutting to a short break now, but we'll be right back. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we continue our show discussing 2026 crop insurance decisions with K-State Flinchbaugh Agricultural Policy Chair, Jenny Ifft. Jenny, thanks for joining us today.
Great to be here.
Jenny, today focusing in on supplemental coverage option and enhanced coverage option, and today we'll refer to them as SCO and ECO. And what are these options?
So these are options, they're crop insurance endorsements. I like to call them high coverage policies, so I don't have to use a new word. But these provide additional risk protection. The crop insurance, it's been used, for years and years in Kansas. It's the foundation of our farm safety net. What most of them are doing is they're going in every year and getting 70 to 75% coverage level protection for their crops. What that is, it's 70 to 75% of expected revenue for that year. So that's the farm yields times the current price. That provides a revenue guarantee or revenue floor for those producers. What these policies do, SCO and ECO, is they allow you to get above that level of protection. So with SCO, you can get up to 86% of expected revenue. With ECO, you can get up to 90 or 95%. So they allow for additional risk protection.
We had a lot of changes in 2025 when it comes to things related to agricultural policy. And did we see any changes that impact these options?
Yes, we did. So there were some changes in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, OB3. And arguably the biggest changes for crop insurance were for SCO, and that was applied to ECO, where the premium subsidy increased to 80%. Previously, it had been 65%. What this effectively does is it cuts in half the price, in half approximately, depends, but it substantially cuts the price for producers. So, that's something that you see sort of automatically. Costs had been a barrier to some producers in the past. So I think this year a lot of people will be taking a second look, and a lot of crop insurance agents are out there talking about these policies.
What would you recommend growers take the time to evaluate when they're looking if they should use SCO or ECO if they want to?
Right. Well, I think there's a couple reasons why you would consider using these policies. So first of all, again, they're not all the same. So with crop insurance, there's, hundreds, thousands of options. We talk about the majority options to keep things clear. So for the typical producer, they got that 70 to 75% coverage level, they may want or need additional risk protection. So there's a couple different ways you can do it. You could increase your policy coverage level to 85%. So that is allowed. It really, your costs are really going to go up if you do that. So there's just it's a very steep increase in cost going from 75 to 80%. So if you want that extra protection, you can use SCO, and it's going to be much more cost effective. You want even more protection from 86% to 95%, then you can use ECO. So, they're there to have extra protection. We're seeing really a third year of tight at best profit margins for crop producers. So, risk management is important. You want to protect what you got, but paying for it is also going to probably be more painful than useful. So, looking at every option can help you find what works best in this environment.
If we're considering using SCO or ECO as an investment, do we see growers often get a return on that investment?
Well, that's sort of baked into how crop insurance is designed. And there's certainly some producers who are going to look at it as an investment. It's something you can buy. Risk management, there's no right or wrong way to do it. So the answer is it's expected to be positive as an investment. So in the long run, a producer should get back more indemnities or payouts than they put in premiums. This is because the federal government pays a part of the true cost. And what you want over time is you want the federal government share plus the producer share to be roughly equivalent to payouts. And so because of this, if you do it long enough, you can come out ahead. It's just sometimes coming out ahead is in 2 years, sometimes it's in 10 years. So you got to be careful with that, but that is how it's designed. It's designed to be as affordable as possible for producers while still operating as insurance.
Are there any other cautions you recommend people take the time to look through?
Absolutely. This does not work as a standard revenue protection or yield protection insurance policy. So the first thing is that the payouts are based on county yields. They are not based on farm level yields. So the value of your policy is based on your farm, but whether or not you get a payout is based on what happens at the county level. And so, that's something that, producers, you have to just understand that that's how it works and be okay with that. You can also look back to your historic production and see how well it matches the county to see if that's something that you're comfortable with. So, producers, they can report their yields after harvest, especially if they think they might get a claim, get a payout. But to figure out if there's a payout for this, you need county yields. So the USDA has to collect all that data from producers and calculate the county yields. That just takes time, and you got to do it right. So those county yields come out late May, early June of the following crop year. So for 2025, if there's a payout, probably not going to come until June of 2026. It's really something you just got to be aware of. Other things, I guess we kind of briefly touched on these. There's still the cost. It could still increase your premium cost 25 to 50%. So the long run can be very long run. So you could get payments in the first 3 out of the first 4 years you buy it, or you could go 4 or 5 years without a payment. And we can see this in Kansas right now. So Northeast Kansas, thinking about corn, they averaged to really good corn yield since 2017. That's been good for them. That's great. And they haven't been as affected by the drought. So they wouldn't have seen a lot of payouts from these high coverage policies. But if you look at western parts of Kansas, these policies really, did pay out a lot during our drought years, which were pretty frequent. So, that experience could look different depending on where you are, what kind of yield trends are happening. It's just something that, you gotta understand that can happen, even when you're paying that extra cost.
Jenny, as always, a lot of different options. And so if producers have more questions or are trying to figure out maybe if they want to switch something up for the year, what's your recommendation?
But I'd say, though, the most important resource is going to be your crop insurance agent. So the prices of all these products are set by the USDA Risk Management Agency. Agents cannot compete on price. They are not allowed to lower prices. They can compete on service. That relationship's really important for producers. But we also have several tools, and these are used both by producers and insurance agents on agmanager.info. So I will go through a couple of those. The first is, if you're completely new to this or you want a refresher, we do have an article that we wrote on what this policy is. It's pretty short and to the point, what the policy changes were. And then we work through several examples for different parts of the state for major crops. We have a calculator, so you can go in and you put in your farm level. You don't have to put in very much. What are your farm yields? What are current prices? It's going to pull the county yields automatically. And then you could enter different potential harvest prices and harvest yields. It's a what if tool for what payouts could be. So that's one tool we have. We also have our crop insurance maps. So these policies use county yields. So we have expected yields. So the expected county yield for these policies, that's treated like a farm's APH or guaranteed yield. So you have those county yields. You also have county historic yields. We have maps that show the share of times these policies would have triggered in particular counties by crop. So you can kind of go in and see what's the likelihood of a payout. We also have something where you can go look at the county level and you can see what specific years that county would have triggered. So was the county, did it have a deep loss? Did it have a shallow loss? What policies would have paid out to the county? And that gets back, I talked to payouts might not be frequent, or they might be frequent for a while, then not frequent for a while. And so looking at that sort of timeline is going to give you an idea of that. We also have a yield correlation tool. And this is for producers who might not be comfortable or as comfortable with a policy that uses county yields. So what a producer can do is they can go in and they can enter their farm level yields. Yeah, I think, you can go back to 1990, but you don't have to. What it does is it takes those yields and then it sort of graphs them relative to the actual county yield. So you could see, are these yields moving in the same direction? They don't need to be the same. They just need to move in the same direction. So we calculate a correlation coefficient, which is a measure of how much they're moving in the same direction, and some information on that.
If people are looking for more resources besides what they're going to find on Ag Manager, what do you recommend?
Well, we've been doing a series of ag profitability conferences across the state. So hopefully some of the listeners have been there. We have one more series left from February 3rd to the 5th. We'll be visiting Garden City, Kingman, and Erie. And so you can still register for those in-person events. I'll also be doing a webinar sometime in mid-February that really focuses and digs into these high coverage policies, ECO and SCO. And, watch for that on agmanager.info.
When is the deadline for all of this?
Well, for spring planted crops, it's March 15th, same as other crop insurance policies.
Jenny, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
That was K-State Flinchbaugh Agricultural Policy Chair, Jenny Ifft. I will link the resources that she mentioned in today's show notes on agtoday.net. We're cutting to a short break now, but we'll be right back. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we conclude our Monday show talking about issues with eating fish with K-State Fisheries and Aquatics Extension Specialist Joe Gerken. Joe, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me back.
Joe, what list has recently come out when it comes to people eating fish and maybe having some issues?
Yeah, the Kansas Department of Health and the Environment just came out with an updated list of some advisories for which fish we can eat in Kansas and consume and the amounts that we can consume them. So mostly the list includes fish that are bottom feeders. So fish like smallmouth buffalo or shovel-nosed sturgeon would be on that list. Also some higher level predators. So the most common one there is probably a largemouth bass that people would see. Also some other things that aren't quite as commonly harvested, like shellfish, so crayfish or clams, mussels, things like that. But there was a list put out. Had some of the fish species that are on there and some of the locations that maybe you'd want to think about how much of the fish you're consuming from those areas.
What are the contaminants or maybe issues that the KDHE said maybe we should avoid this?
Yeah, there's a lot of really well-known contaminants that can build up in fish. And so common examples of that would be what we would call PCBs or polychlorinated bipheноls. And they're chemicals that build up in the fatty tissues of fish. They can cause certain cancers, damage to organ systems if you consume them in high quantities. There's lots of different things. Pesticides, arsenic, lead, plastics are becoming, microplastics especially are becoming a concern. One of the big ones that I'm sure a lot of listeners are familiar with is mercury. And so mercury can build up. It's especially harmful for pregnant or nursing women or young children. It can impact the nervous system and the development of the nervous system. So there's lots of potential risks. And, most of these can be mitigated by just controlling how much of the fish that we actually consume.
Are there common regions where we see more contaminants?
Yeah, some of the bigger cities. So if we're in the Wichita area or Kansas City area in Kansas, you're going to tend to see higher accumulations. Some of them, though, might be small lakes that have been affected over time. And so a lot of it, I would recommend checking out the list and kind of figuring out, is your area part of some of the concerns that we might be experiencing?
When a person looks at the fish, if they've just caught it per se, can they see anything that's wrong? Or is it just research and science that something's not quite right?
Most of the time you're not going to be able to look at a fish and tell whether it has something that you don't want to consume in it. So what you can do is you can tell whether it's a big or a little fish. So if you're going to go out and you are going to eat some of these fish, I'd recommend sticking to smaller fish. Kind of the rule of thumb is your forearm length is kind of the cutoff. And so, that's just a generalization. But, if you catch a bunch of fish, if you want to keep some of the smaller ones and let the bigger ones go, that would be a good way to help reduce some of the risks that you might experience.
Are there any groups of people that should maybe be a little bit more cautious about this?
Generally speaking, unless you're consuming a large amount of fish, and so eating fish multiple times a week, you're probably fine. The biggest risk is going to be in some of the more vulnerable groups. And so things that come to mind would be pregnant women or women that are thinking about becoming pregnant, young children as they're developing, their immune systems and their nervous systems, all that development that takes place, elderly, immunocompromised groups. So all of those would kind of be the big risk groups, but just kind of be cautious of how much you're consuming.
I feel like today we've talked a little bit about maybe why we shouldn't eat fish, but Joe, people can still go enjoy some tasty fish.
Yeah, fish is very safe to eat, and research has shown a lot of really good benefits to eating fish. So things like healthier immune systems, healthier gut bacteria, can reduce inflammation and lower heart disease risk. The American Heart Association and the FDA both recommend eating fish at least twice a week. So just kind of make sure that maybe we're focusing on some of those smaller fish when we're harvesting them and eating them, like I said, as part of a well-balanced diet, not eating them every night if you can.
Joe, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Thanks for having me.
That was K-State Fisheries and Aquatics Extension Specialist Joe Gerken. I will link that KDHE list in today's show notes on agtoday.net. That's all we have for you today on Agriculture Today, but we'll be back with more for you tomorrow.